What's up, guys? Today I want to talk about how MadMooks got started. So how I got into Chevy Nomads and how that led into the business and so forth. So this is a picture of my dad's 1957 Nomad from 1967. He took this picture a few days before he sold the car. He showed this picture to me when I was about 14 years old. When I was 13, 14, I sort of fell in love with 1965 Mustang Fastbacks, and I would have swore that that was the first car I was going to own. I was just so hooked on them. As a kid, when you get into something, I had all the magazines and the books and all that stuff, so I was just totally in love with the car. And my dad wasn't a Ford guy. As things progressed and got serious, my dad showed me this picture and said, "You know what? Let's put an end to this." So I see this picture. I'm seeing a '57 Chevy for the first time. I'm seeing a Nomad for the first time, and I was hooked on the Nomad. The Mustang was kind of in my rear view at that point. This car was pretty radical. They C-notched it, they tunneled it. The lowest Nomad in Southern California, my dad claims to this day. Kelsey Hayes wheels. It had hydros. It was just an awesome car for its time. And here is the last known picture that he has of this car. And this is just, I'm seeing the tailgate bars. Again, this is the first time I'm seeing a Nomad, right? It just was awesome. I just fell in love with it instantly. So at that point, I wanted a Nomad. A 14-year-old kid wanted a Nomad, which obviously wishful thinking at the time. This was 1999. Okay. So this picture right here is a guy I met on Facebook who owns the car currently. Sent me this picture. He took this picture before it was shipped overseas. It went to Switzerland, I believe. And as you can see, the car isn't low. So whoever owned it in this picture, they pretty much undid everything my dad did to the car. Sadly, I was always, I had this dream of maybe one day finding the car as it looked in the picture and maybe trying to buy it back. But this picture confirmed that wasn't going to happen. So this is what the car looks like currently, right now. The current owner, they're doing a factory restoration, frame off, totally bone stock. Everything, the frame and all that suspension, that's just long gone. It's unfortunate, the owner's stoked on it, that's great and everything. I would have loved to seen, the car looked like the picture that my dad had. And, hey, it is what it is. So going back to, okay, here we are, I'm 15 years old, right? And I'm hooked on Nomads. This is right when the internet was kind of getting started, buying classic cars back then. A lot more of a challenge than it is today. Finding a Nomad back then was very difficult, actually. You were pretty much, local classifieds and Pomona is pretty much all you had. I found this on a kind of a weird classified site on the internet, and it was in Wisconsin. We made a deal. My mom bought the car for me. Got to throw that in there. She always reminds me to this day that she bought me my first Nomad. My dad flew out there. We made a deal, trailered the car back. The car was a 60s style build, very period correct. And I'll show you just shortly here. And you can kind of see some of it. They had pinstriping on the tailgate. So the back end, that's pretty much how we got it. They had the taillights weren't like that. They weren't factory 56 Chevy taillights. They had these, I believe they're called Lee lenses. It's like a full cover, it's a full lens. And that's what they had when we got the car. And it, for me at age 16, that just wasn't going to work. So I picked up a set of taillights, which wasn't easy at all back then to find a set of taillight assemblies. Fortunately, I was able to get something cheap. and make it look more like a 56 Chevy. So here's the front end of the car. The teardrop scoop, the teardrop scoop is what was on the car. The grill and the park lights, we actually bought those. So when we got the car, it had a tubular grill, and it went from the fender extension all the way to the fender extension. It covered that whole section right there. When I got it, I was not into that at all. That whole look, I was just not into it. It actually had pinstriping, the same pinstriping on the tailgate it had on the front of the hood, which I removed. And so a couple other things. The car shows torque thrusts. It had BFGs and Kragers when we got it, and they were fat tires. This thing was high up in the air. The suspension was kind of for show. The rear of the car had coil springs that really pumped the car up in the air. I mean, it was high, and it just looked very unsafe to drive. So we got rid of all that, and then we put 2-inch blocks in the rear. I forget what we did with the front end, but this next picture, okay, so this is how I drove it. When we got the car, it had 68 Corvette side pipes. And I remember thinking that was kind of cool. And we actually tried to make those work somehow, tried to get a muffler in there or something. We really wanted it to work. It had full-length headers. It was a 327 out of a 65 Vet. 327, 365 horse, double hump heads, a 4-speed, I think it was a Muncie or Borg-Warner, I can't remember. And then it had full-length headers into side pipes, and it was, I just remember we struggled trying to get this thing road ready. So we ditched all of it. We left the 327 in there. We just put a new manifold and carburetor, and we just did I can't remember if they were full-length headers or not, but we just stuck Flowmasters on there and for now, and it sounded great. It sounded big, man. It just rumbled. So here's the front end. The chrome was in great shape, actually. So the bumper chrome and the hood bars and extensions, that's all how we got it. And then we replaced the grill and the park lights. This is actually, so I sent my picture in to Super Chevy magazine, and I remember getting the magazine. They don't tell you when they're gonna put your picture in there. So I was just totally blindsided by this when I was flipping through the pages, and it was like the reader's ride section. I just, man, for a 16-year-old kid to have your car in Super Chevy magazine, it was like the greatest thing in the world. And they did this whole write-up that, I'm the one that sent in all this information, and then they just edited it. So I drove this thing to high school. I had a 7 a.m. zero period class. I drove this thing to high school for a semester. Every day I started this car up at 6 a.m. My freaking neighbors hated me. They hated me. You start this car up, it just rattled all the windows. It was just insane, just so intense. This car was really not, dude, it was a really good driver, just totally turnkey. It sounded great. It drove great. The previous owner didn't really drive. The motor was, it was fairly fresh. I mean, it was just for show back then. They showed the car a lot in Wisconsin. They didn't drive it, obviously. It just wasn't road ready. So everything, the wiring, everything was in great shape. It had rust. But that was really only the paint was very acceptable. It was chipping in some areas. It had a lacquer paint. But for I think $9,000, it was good enough for me at age 16, that's for sure. So here's the interior of the car. Pretty much how you see it is how we got it. There was a different steering wheel on there. They had pinstriping on the dash. I can't remember if I took that off. I think I left that there, the pinstriping. It looked pretty cool, and they had clear over it and so forth, so it wouldn't have been the easiest to remove. The side panels, they sprayed. It was originally black and white side panels, door panels, and then they sprayed the white. They dyed it black, all black. They had wood stickers on the dash trim to give it that wood grain look, but everything as you see it was how it was, and you can kind of see that's what when I drove the car, man. That's what I was looking at, that teardrop scoop. Pretty wild. So here's under the hood. A lot different than what we got. It had dual quads. It had that finned aluminum valve covers and air cleaner cover and all that from the 60s, that period correct look. We did the MSDs and all that stuff. So we ditched the carbs, put a single Edelbrock on there. You can see they chromed all the front end stuff, that radiator support and all that. They chromed all that, and it didn't have the booster, the power brake booster. We did that. Electric wipers. I actually, man, the wipers worked great. I drove that thing in the rain a lot, and they worked great. You can see the passenger fender is a gray primer. I had started stripping it. The paint was going right there, so I just stripped it and rattle canned it. I didn't really care. They chromed the hood hinges. I mean, they chromed a lot of stuff under the hood. It was crazy what they had chrome plated. And this is when I believe I had graduated, and I just, I made the decision that I wanted to paint it. And looking back, no, I probably should have just left it as is, because ultimately it led to me selling it. But the project started, and that's me stripping. Man, I stripped that whole car by hand pretty much. And there's the project car. So this is years later. Pretty radical project for a kid that's in college. I was working, and I was dealing with Nomad parts on the side. So there was a lot going on. I was full throttle into Nomads at this point. I had made a name for myself in the Nomad hobby, dealing with used parts. And this thing had a Morrison chassis and a 502 Ramjet. And there I am with the 502. Pretty wild. Custom firewall. I had to notch it because it didn't. The Ramjet was hitting the firewall. And aluminum radiator. I mean, this thing is awesome. I started it up. It just sounded ridiculous. The 502 Ramjet. This is when 502 crate motors were all the craze, man. They were super hot, and then LS kind of just took everyone by. I don't think the 502. I don't think they really expected LS to catch on and just take over. 502. If you had a 502 crate engine, man, you were the bomb. If you had it in a 55 Chevy or something, that was the motor. 502. This is 2002, 2003. And the Ramjet to me was the top dog. Of course, it's the 502 with fuel injection. Just an aggressive looking motor, man. I think I loved the look of it more than the functionality of it. The look of it, it just looks like a snake or something, just about to attack. Just so cool. And here it is. I replaced all the floors. I replaced so much in it. I tubbed it in the back. I pulled the wheel wells out. It didn't look like it was tubbed, but that was the goal. Floors were replaced. Firewall was replaced. I did the quarters were replaced. Almost everything except for the roof and a few other things, the dash and all that stuff. But man, I made a custom cargo deck. I did a lot to this thing. So this is before I notched the firewall. And this is a cool shot of the motor, man. That motor was awesome. But then, this is 2002, 510 horsepower. That was a lot back then. Now they're doing 600-700. So let me go back here. So 2004, 2005, or 2006 maybe, I sell the car, right? The real world hits in and I cannot do this anymore. You know, my heart and my eyes were bigger than my bank account, so I had to get rid of it. Unfortunately, some guy got a bitchin' deal on the car. I don't keep in contact with him anymore. I think the car's been sold a few times, but so 2008, you know, I'm pretty much I got the bug again. You know, I want a driver. I want a Nomad again. So I found this 57 Nomad off Craigslist. It was a California car. I bought it as is, changed the wheels, did some brake work and so forth. Just a great driver, and I drove this around for 2 years. This is a legit daily driver. Drove this thing around, just awesome car. Very rust-free car, and it just looked amazing. I lowered it 3 inches, 3-inch block in the back, and I think I clipped a coil in front. I can't remember what I did. And the interior was, man, it's just great. Nothing fancy, but it was nice, you know, and that's all I really needed. Very cool. So at this time, I'm working at a place out by LAX, and I'm living out in Long Beach, and I still had the car. I'm still doing Nomad stuff, and I get into liftgate straightening. Actually, with this car, I started liftgate straightening. And every liftgate I straightened, I put it on this car to check my work. And then you can see we did the brakes, 13-inch brakes from CPP. Coy's wheels were, you know, I'm not a fan of Coy's wheels, but back then, 18s and 20s with tires mounted was like $1,500, and you really can't beat that. You can see it had a 4-speed, which I was cool with because my high school Nomad was also a 4-speed, so no problems there. I mean, super clean car on the inside, man. So this is where we had a few Nomads at the time. Both the 56 and the 55. That's not the same 55 we have now. That one's all blue. The one we have right now is two-tone. Both those Nomads have been sold. Don't have them anymore. For whatever reason, the neighbors didn't like this scene. You know, they're cool cars. I can't imagine why they wouldn't, but they didn't. So there's the other 55, and then we got the black Nomad back there, the 57. Still driving around the red one. And here's my dad's 55 Nomad in Havasu. And at this point, MadMooks is created, and I start my own business, and just never looked back. Buying and selling. I started off with buying and selling parts, and then I got into liftgate straightening, and then shortly after I started the company, I manufactured my first part and just never looked back. And then MadMooks just took off, and started in Southern California. Now we're in Lake Havasu. We still have some Nomads. Actually, the two pictured right there are the ones we have. I had to sell my red Driver 57 Nomad to start the company, and just never looked back. So that is how MadMooks was created, and it all started with a single picture being shown to a 14-year-old kid that was into Mustang fastbacks. So pretty crazy. Life is a trip. Thanks for watching, guys.